I think a lot of times when people think about revolution, when black people start talking revolution, everybody assumes bloodshed because that's the white idea of revolution. That's the Boston Tea Party, bloodshed, you know, bloodshed and destruction of property. That's a white ideology when it comes to revolution. The true black revolution is love. At every turn, their whole plan and process for us to be divided and for us to not love ourselves. If you don't love yourself, you're not gonna love your brother. You don't love yourself, you're not gonna love your sister. It's easy to look in the mirror and hate yourself and leave your child. That's easy. You know what I'm saying? Now, these are systemic conditions that are being reinforced all the time through advertisement, through media, and on a real grassroots level. Let's talk about. We can bring that crack epidemic back, but that was a number one divisive tactic used in the last 40 years because you see black women out here selling their body for drugs. This may be how you're informed about black women. Your mother out here selling her body for drugs or just doing drugs and not caring for you as a child. This may be informing how you feel about black women. You see your brother get killed by his best friend over a drug deal. This is going to inform your trust with niggas. Your daddy leave you because he can't keep it together because he on that pipe. This is going to there's a lot of information being passed here, and none of it is loving. So if we're gonna engage in any revolution, the revolution has to be us regaining our trust and our empathy towards one another, us having an understanding about the conditions that we've been through and the conditions we're currently in, and return to a place of love. Because love that brings community. Jasmine's mixer, it felt like love in there, bro. When we did our live show in Jackson, that was love in there, bro. That's the revolution for us. Because when you love somebody, you'll show up for them. Shit, when you love somebody, you'll protect their life. You'll defend their life. When you love somebody, if somebody took their life, you'll take the other person's life. You'll kill for what you love. You're going to make a lot of excuses for people you don't love. That's why don't nothing get done. It's a lack of love. George Zimmerman is still alive because of a lack of love. We're saddened by the action. We're saddened by that. Because there's something in us that still, we still got that connection. We love Trayvon Martin, right? That's our little brother. That's our little cousin. That's somebody's nephew. That's somebody's son. We love him, but we don't love ourselves enough to get retribution. That when it's time to get retribution, niggas want to let God handle everything. Black love is the revolution because that's the thing they trying to stop. Whatever they trying to stop, let's get down to the true nature of things. If the process is to divide the family, then the process is to destroy the love. If the process is divide and conquer, what they're trying to do is divide and conquer our love for one another. And it's worked. I think a lot of times when...
Welcome to the Jaybe Show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm your host, James Fauntleroy. So good to see all of you here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. It is two events today. Happy Easter and happy 420. Yes, they converge. So good to see all of you here today. Oh my goodness. And I just want to share this with y'all because I thought this was hilarious. And why not, right? Because it is Easter and 420, well, they got to smush together. And here we have Snoop Dogg decided to share this when 420 falls on Easter Sunday. So just, oh my goodness, getting high with the Lord. He's going to take you to the upper room. Almost quite literally. Anyway, so good to see all of you here today. Just to let you guys know, the JB Show is every single Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can also find me on the Savvy and JB Show on Thursdays. And you can find me on the JB Show on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. and more days coming up. So with that being said, also, if you guys have not already, do the thing. Give a like to the stream. This helps me out very much. This helps us out very much as far as being able to reach more people and to get more eyes on the message, and the message being worker solidarity, building community, building dual power, doing mutual aid, and all that good stuff that actually leads to our better material conditions. So thank you very much for that. Also, if you guys have not also, please make sure to share and subscribe as well. If you guys have not already, you guys can actually go to our mailing list. You guys can go to revolutionaryblackout.substack.com so that you guys are notified whenever we go live. So you guys have that there too. And if you guys would like to get in touch with us, any encouraging words, any news stories you find very interesting, whatever, then you guys can go and email us at revolutionaryblackout@outlook.com. So thank you so much for that. Well, it is definitely a special day. This is going to be actually an abbreviated version of this show because I do have some comrades coming over to say hi after my transplant. So we're going to be chopping it up for a little bit. But one of the things I want to do is I'm going to be doing one segment today as opposed to my usual two. So just to let you guys know, if this show stops a little early, you'll know why. But for now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into the chat and we're going to go into the chat and say hello to all the people who are here joining me right now. So we have Chris coming in saying hello, 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 Chris. We have Jace coming in saying happy Easter all. Yes, happy Easter all as well. I have Kate Mack coming in saying, hey, everyone. Hey, JB, happy Easter. Thank you very much. Roger says, JB, I'm saying, man, you got to update that photo. Got you running around here looking like Anthony Anderson. Roger, you're not going to let this go, are you? I don't think he is. All right. Bad Wolf says, good morning from the state of Florida. Yes, I think we're going to become the child labor state. It's disgusting. We're going to talk about that and what that can mean for those of us who are workers in this state. So thank you very much for that. Terry Connolly coming in saying, peace and greetings, comrades. Thank you so much. Good to see you, Terry. DJ Leader coming in saying, happy Easter, RBN fam. JB, can't say enough how amazing you look. Rejuvenated, energetic, beautiful brother after your kidney transplant. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't necessarily see the difference right now. Maybe if I, waste some time and then take a look back as compared to what I used to look like before kidney transplant, I'll probably see the difference, but I can't see it too much right now. But thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Roger says, on this day, Jesus resurrected with peace, pipe, and what? I don't know what that means, but oh my goodness. Oh, Roger. Amanda says, hi, JB. Happy Easter. Happy Easter to all. I was just thinking we need a Malcolm X Day. Made a snap about it. May 19th is his birthday, 1925. We need a special. Thank you very much. I agree. Thing is, like, because of what he stood for, it's harder to whitewash Malcolm X than it is Martin Luther King Jr. And so they're not going to want to do it. I can see if we were to change this economic system to a worker-centered system, I can actually see us having a day celebrating the birthday of Malcolm X. I can actually see that happening. I can also see us having a Fred Hampton Day too. That would be possible. All right, Steve Wolfbrandt coming in and saying, hello, everybody. Yes, thank you very much. Good to see you. We have Tommy D says, hello from California. Hello, Tommy from California. All right. We have here, let me see if I can pronounce it correctly. Sasanak US says, hello, all you beautiful people. Thank you so very much. Good to see you. All right. Yeah, the creepy balloon face. Yeah. Jimmy coming in and saying, laughing emojis. That's what I like to see. I love to see people laughing. All right. And then you got to use some of those smiling with the new kidney photos. Yeah. It is great. And I've been feeling better lately. I've been more myself as of late. So I have to get used to this JB because I've been living with the other JB for 17 years. So it is getting some used to. And I feel like I calmed down a little bit too. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I've calmed down a little bit. Let me know what you guys think. post transplant? Like, has there been a change in my presentation at all? I just want to know. If you guys can let me know in the comments in the chat, or also if you guys are watching this on the rewatch, what do you guys think in the comments below? So thank you very much for that. Now, we're going to get into our topic for today. This is going to be a topic that I wish was a different one, but unfortunately, the way the world is, we got to talk about it. And of course, I live in the state of Florida, so we got to get into this, especially in regards to making sure our kids are safe. So let's get into it right now. We're going to get into this. Child labor expansion. Why is Ron DeSantis looking at that little girl who is doing very laborious work? And he's looking at it like, hey, that's a good idea. Let's get into it right now. In the state of Florida, we have a looming crisis about to happen. And that looming crisis means that many kids will be subject to what I like to think is more exploitation, further exploitation. If you are against childhood exploitation, I think you should take this matter very seriously. Because we talk about things like child trafficking, we talk about abuse, things like that. But are we going to start talking about the potential abuse and exploitation of children in the workforce? Oh, this is going to be a big one. So there's been some news lately that a lot of the protections for child labor are actually being rolled back by the DeSantis and Florida Republicans here, partially because, well, they're cutting out the illegal immigrants, right? And so in order to fill in those gaps, instead of actually paying Floridians a living wage in order to do those same jobs, they want to hire children instead. Let's get into the article really quick, and then we'll get into a video that I also want to get into as well. But let's take a look at this. So make sure. What happened to my? What just happened to my link? Oh, there it is. Okay. It refreshed on its own. That's okay. We shall press on. All right. So here we go. So this is out of Orlando Weekly. It says Florida bill rolling back child labor protection advances. Critics say it's unnecessary. The blurb says there's already a waiver system in place to allow older teens to work more. Let's get into this because this actually came out 3 days ago. So it's actually going to be gaining more ground in this state. It says a Florida bill that will roll back certain child labor protections in the state for minors as young as 14 was advanced by a panel of Florida state representatives Thursday, despite concerns from some that the legislator is looking to solve a problem that doesn't exist. If passed, the bill, HB 1225, would get rid of restrictions for the number of hours that teenagers aged 16 and older can work per week during the school year. Plus, do the same for teens as young as 14 who are homeschooled, enrolled in virtual school, or recipients of a high school diploma. A provision allowing 13-year-olds to work during the summer of the year they turned 14 was quietly cut out of the bill Thursday by the bill sponsor following public backlash. Let me ask you guys this one question. I'm just quite curious. How many of you started working before the age of 16? And by working, I mean actually at an establishment, right? You know, babysitting and things like that, you know, I really don't count. But actually working at an established workplace, you know, it could be office, restaurant, farm, what have you. Because I honestly did not officially start working until the age 16. In fact, I got hired the day I turned 16. How many of you have worked earlier than that? I'm actually quite curious. And so I'll be looking through the chat, see your responses. But 14 is typically the year where a lot of kids start high school. And so if they're focused on working as well as starting high school, it feels like something's going to take a back seat. Let's continue on. It says the problem sounds like we need flexibility for our 16 and 17-year-olds and other kids to be able to work more if it's good for their lives or get more experience in the workplace. That's from Dr. Rich Templin with the Florida AFL-CIO. Now, he says, I have a solution, he told House lawmakers after a beat. You don't need to hear this bill anymore today. The solution already exists. Templin, speaking on behalf of the state's largest federation of labor unions, was referring specifically to Florida's child labor waiver system overseen by the state's Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Since Florida Governor Jeb Bush dismantled the State Department of Labor in 2002, the DBPR has been enforcing the agency of Florida child labor laws. Under Florida law, the DBPR is authorized to grant waivers from certain child labor restrictions for minors by request. Did you guys know that we don't have an official Department of Labor at the state level here in Florida? There's one word here. It is deregulation. If you don't have a regulatory body to regulate the industry they're supposed to regulate or the sector that they're supposed to regulate, there is no regulation. And so either the regulations are very minimal at best or non-existent. And so we see how this happens. Jeb Bush rolled it back in 2002. So we're looking at over 20 years ago that we have been without a state Department of Labor in this state. Isn't that baffling to you? That we don't have a department dedicated to the labor rights of workers in this state? I thought the Republicans in this state were pro-worker. They said they're pro-worker now, but at the same time, they're pro-business, meaning the people at the top, the shareholders and the CEOs. Not really the workers. As we can see, they actually got rid of one of the departments that would oversee for workers. And Ron DeSantis never actually brought it back. Makes you wonder about his devotion to workers, doesn't it? Let's continue. Now, says a waiver can be requested to allow children aged 14 and older to work longer hours or to work in certain jobs during the school year since laws are looser during the summer. Such waivers are granted by the department on a case-by-case basis based on the best interest of the child, according to the DBPR. A spokesperson for the department previously told Orlando Weekly that the state granted 5,119 child labor waivers during the 2022-2023 fiscal year, running from July 1st to June 30th the following year. The spokesperson did not immediately respond to the request for comment Thursday morning with more recent data. Opponents of the Florida HB 1225, including Templin, pointing out that teenagers are already allowed to join Florida's workforce, provided that they comply with federal hazardous work restrictions, which bar employers from putting kids to work in the mines or on roofs, for example. According to data and work trends analyzed by the Florida Policy Institute, more than 100,000 teenagers are already in Florida's workforce with the state's current child labor restrictions in place. I can give this an example. So back in the day, I used to work in fast food. A lot of us teenagers did. And when preparing certain foods, there are certain machines that are used in order to be able to prepare these foods. And a lot of these machines, like choppers and things like that, are only allowed to be used by anyone over the age of 18. Meaning those of us who are 16, 17-year-olds that are working at this establishment cannot prepare that food because it will require us using that particular machine that is supposed to be used by anybody over the age of 18. Now we're talking about pre-2002. Why did they have that regulation in place? You got to think about something. You got to think about the science of teenagers, the teenage mind, the young adult mind, really. The prefrontal cortex, and me and Savvy talked about this on Thursday evening. The prefrontal cortex, which actually rules our judgment, right, is not fully developed until the age of 24 to 25 years of age. So therefore, if you have somebody using this dangerous equipment before that age, that puts them at a higher risk for injury or even death. That being said, it makes sense to have some more heavier restrictions on a child when it comes to working in certain conditions. But unfortunately, some of these employers, they actually want the children to be able to utilize these machines, because then that means they don't have to hire adults. We don't have to hire adults, then guess what? Exploitation. It's easier. Just 1 second. You guys bear with me for a second. Of course, you guys know I just had a transplant, so things are a little bit different physically. I'm gonna put up this card, and I'll be right back. So continuing on, as we have been reading. So Templeton continues and says this legislation is not necessary at all unless you're an unscrupulous employer who wants to tell a 16-year-old, I need you to close the restaurant tonight. And that 16-year-old says, no, I can't. I got an exam tomorrow. And that employer can say, well, if you don't close the restaurant tonight, you're fired. So if you're looking out for kids and parents and flexibility, it's done. Good job. And this is another piece of the puzzle that a lot of people aren't thinking about. You're making it so that there's potential that teenagers will have to choose between school and work, between an education and being in the workforce. And they shouldn't have to choose. Dare I say they should be able to have both. But one should not be at risk of the other. And unfortunately, because of the system that we have, well, that's the way they want it. And it's quite unfortunate. So let's continue on. So this is the second year in a row that Florida lawmakers have taken up legislation aiming to weaken the state's child labor laws, following a national trend of rollback supported by business groups and conservative think tanks. The Foundation for Government Accountability, a Naples-based think tank that has become the leading force behind child labor rollback efforts in other Republican-controlled states, drafted an early version of a bill last year, specifically weakening work protections for teens age 16 and older. Public records obtained by Orlando Weekly last week shows that the governor's office was directly advocating for additional rollbacks behind the scenes this year. The governor's office, Ron DeSantis, which has a friendly working relationship with the Foundation for Government Accountability, drafted legislation that was later filed by Representative Monique Miller and Senator Jay Collins. Says, let's call this what it is. Another attempt to roll back basic protections for kids, driving not by any real policy need, but by corporate greed and a political agenda of Governor Ron DeSantis. That's from Jack Oberlink. So here's the thing. It's not about protecting kids. That is for damn sure. Because if you're actually trying to protect kids, then you would be trying to protect them from the exploitation, the potential exploitation that happens in the workforce. Because it is easier to exploit children than it is to exploit an adult. And unfortunately, that's what is happening here. You got to think. If you can talk kids out of putting their education first, well, then you can also make it so that they do not learn as much. They become more just cogs in the machine. And then they also get used to that exploitation. And then they learn to accept that exploitation. And that's a very dangerous thing, because once you get people to accept their exploitation, then it goes downhill from there. It goes further and further and further. The ultimate exploitation really is slavery. Let's continue on. Says DeSantis himself is currently in a hot seat for another story that garnered a slew of headlines concerning his wife's charity, Hope Florida, and his alleged misuse of taxpayer dollars to fund anti-marijuana and anti-abortion initiatives. DeSantis, however, reportedly claims it's nothing more than a smear campaign by the liberal media. So this is from Daniel Perez, a Republican from Miami. He's had personal concerns about approving additional rollbacks for Florida child labor laws, although his bill sponsors claim they're only trying to align the state with federal law. Florida child labor restrictions are currently somewhat stronger than federal regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act due to the advocacy of Floridians who advocated for additional protections decades ago. Now, here's the point. It says research has found that young workers are at greater risk of being exploited on the job. Young workers may be more vulnerable to sexual harassment, being pressured by an employer to work longer hours, and wage theft, or not being paid the full amount they're owed. Florida lawmakers have repeatedly overlooked efforts to establish an agency dedicated in part to preventing wage theft or addressing workplace health and safety issues. Half of the population is female. Let me ask you this. Knowing the sexual harassment and potential harassment that happens, are you willing to roll back those workplace protections for your daughters? What about if it was happening to your son? Would you be more willing to allow those rollbacks? And yet this is one of the potential dangers that we're risking now. These kids who are impressionable, that do not have the proper developed judgment, and also taking more prioritization of work over school. Now, there's something that somebody said here that I also want to get into. I said Skidmore, a Democrat from Boca Raton, says that her first job was at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Her siblings began working there when they were teenagers. She said, we worked part-time and went to school, and it was a good part of our life. But she added, I will tell you that each one of my sisters and me were harassed. It was a long time ago. We were very vulnerable at 15 years old, 16-year-old girls in the workplace. Women in the chat, when you started working as a teenager, how many of you were harassed, especially by grown-ass men? Or even other boys your age in the workplace? How many? Let a brother know. But this is also potential dangers, right? So you have people who don't have a well-developed, judgment in their brains. And then on top of that, you mix things like sexual harassment, potential sexual harassment that can happen in the workplace. You also have dangers of different equipment that are being used, or the protections for using said equipment can be loosened. You also have the pressures of wage theft and forcing kids to work longer hours so that their education takes a back seat. How would you feel? How would you feel if that was your child? It's funny because a lot of people talk about how we need to protect our kids. And I hear this especially a lot from conservatives. Liberals sometimes, but conservatives definitely mainly. And yet, have you thought about the potential dangers that you could be putting your child in by rolling back these child labor protections, by expanding child labor? Have you thought about it? The potential harm that could be had. I think people need to really regard this in their minds. Let's continue on. This is from Lady Amador, an organizer of Florida Student Power who worked various retail and restaurant jobs. By the way, just to let you guys know, there are a ton of teenagers that work in restaurant, especially with fast food and retail. All right. So, similarly shared her own personal account with harassment on the job in front of a Senate panel last month. She said, they took advantage of me in every single space. And I did not tell my parents because I wanted to provide for them. Now, let's go into here. Says the bill unironically approved just after the bill that seeks to protect children from pornographic material in schools needs to clear one more committee stop before it can go to the Florida House for a vote. The proposal needs a majority support from both House and Senate in order to pass, plus the approval of Governor Ron DeSantis. Florida legislative session is scheduled to conclude on May 2nd. So I wanted to get into, there was a quote from someone. There's a quote from somebody that I just want to address as well. Because I think a lot of times people have this flawed type of thinking when it comes to child labor. And I just want to debunk some things. Let me see. Is that part of it? I think that's it. Let's see. So, just to address something, there are some people who think that kids that are working at a job, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds in a workplace, a lot of them will assume and say, well, these kids, they're working to just make some pocket change, be able to spend and have a little money, for school clothes and going out with friends. And that's pretty much it. That's a classist opinion when it comes to many of us who are teenagers who are working. I can speak from experience. One of the things that I did, so I've worked since I was 16 years old. And you can ask my brother and my mother this, and they will tell you what I'm saying is true. 90 to 95% of every single paycheck I got went straight to my mother to help with bills. It's not that my mother didn't work. My mother had a job. My mother didn't just have a job. She had a well-established job. She was gainfully employed. The problem is that they don't pay enough for workers, even when you're adults. So in order to be able to supplement that, myself and my brother would give a large majority of our checks every 2 weeks, just so that to make sure the rent, the electric, gas is kept in the car, all these things that are necessary in order for us to be able to survive. And it wasn't that my mom was forcing us to do this. No, me and my brother, we did this on our own volition, because we got sick and tired of seeing our mother cry in the seclusion of her room at wondering how she's going to pay these bills. And so primarily, Me and my brother, we were actually helping support the household as teenagers. So we weren't gallivanting the streets on the weekends, spending money and hanging out with friends. No, most likely we were at home just chilling, playing our PS2. And most of that money that we actually earned while working actually went to our mom in order to make sure that the bills were paid, make sure that we have food in the house. So when people talk about, oh, teenagers, these jobs aren't really necessary, so therefore we can just roll back these protections, you're looking at it from a very privileged standpoint. Because a lot of us had to work. There was no other option for us. But thank goodness some of those protections were in place. Because if they weren't, we would have allowed ourselves to be exploited even more. Because we were trying to survive. So when people say, oh, they're just trying to earn pocket change. No. We were involved with how much the electric bill and the rent was. We were involved in all that as teenagers. Why the hell do you think I was able to move out at 18 and know exactly what to do? Why in the hell do you think I was so independent as a young adult? Because my mother taught me to be independent. She taught us independence. I was cooking for the entire family at 11. Ask my mom. I was cooking full meals at 11 years old for the entire family. Clothes, me and my brother, we washed our own clothes. You got a washer and dryer, you know how to use it. We were independent. And so the thing is this assumption that the money that we made was negligible and we don't really need those protections is wrongheaded. Now, I said that we in Florida have been without a state labor agency for over 20 years. Here is an article that was referenced. It says 2002, the Department of Labor is dismantled. So let's take a look at this. It says, but despite having one of the highest minimum wages in the South. Sorry, let me just. Florida has still had the highest minimum wage violation rate of the 10 most populous states in the nation. Failing to pay someone the wage to which they are entitled is known as wage theft. And in Florida, it happens most often to minimum wage workers. Arguably, this is in large part the result of the state's failure to prioritize a means to enforce wage protections for all Floridians. In Florida, Black and Latino workers are already more likely to experience wage theft than white workers. When gender and immigration status are considered, Black and Latina immigrant women are 2 and 2.3 times more likely to face it than white U.S.-born women. As a result, failing to enforce pay disproportionately harms Floridians of color. Until 2002, the state of Florida had a state labor department. The Department of Labor and Employment Security, DLES. Founded in 1978, DLES included 6 programs, a support division, and numerous independent entities under its administrative umbrella. Yet only a narrow subset of DLES's duties and budget were allocated to worker protections, with unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and workforce development consisting the bulk of its responsibilities. Early in his term, Governor Jeb Bush set his sights on dismantling DLES. The introduction of the federal welfare reform in the mid to late 1990s, I said 1900s, 1990s, gave states increased flexibility in administering welfare and employment programs, which prompted resurrecting of state labor agencies. In 1999, the Florida legislature initiated DLES dismantling and directed the state to identify workforce development divisions and programs that could be eliminated, consolidated, or privatized. Given its continued weakening of DLES roles since the mid-1990s, it's all but a formality when the Florida legislature finally abolished the department entirely during the 2002 session. It says, as Governor Bush stated in 2002, many DLES programs were transferred elsewhere, but not all. Adopting a mechanism to protect and enforce wage and hour laws for all workers was not considered at the time. This resulted in reinscribing a system in which employers could commit wage theft without state interference. Identical bills to reestablish the Department of Labor have been introduced in 2021, 2022, and 2023, yet all have failed to receive meaningful legislative consideration. Furthermore, the legislature has doubled down by attempting to block local wage theft ordinances numerous times since 2011. Thus far, advocates have staved off such proposals. So, as you can see, wage theft is one of the biggest hurdles, one of the biggest transgressions that we have in the state against workers. You don't think that that is going to be higher among teenagers? So with that being said, I want to share this video here because we got to talk about the history of child labor in this country, because I think that's really important. So I'm going to share this too as well about how child labor still exists in America. And so we'll get into that and let's go.
A lot more of this.
50 children were found to be working graveyard shifts.
10-year-olds work for free at a McDonald's.
14 states have introduced legislation to loosen child labor laws.
But to understand why we seem to have a child labor problem in this country, we have to look at our history. When did it start? Why was it so common? What did it actually look like? And how we cracked down on it. Any story about when child labor began in this country starts before we were a country. In Britain, poor children almost always started work as soon as their parents could find employment for them. The same was true in colonial America. This usually took three forms: helping out around the house or family farm, indentured servitude to a tradesperson, often by children of immigrants, or the children of slaves who were made to work alongside their parents. The biggest sector, by far, was family farms. From the early 1600s until 1776, 90% of all Americans worked on a farm. Most of this was subsistence farming, so naturally kids went to work on their family farms to help feed the family. Even after the Revolutionary War, all the way up until the 1940s, the majority of Americans worked in farming, so it's no wonder that this was also where the majority of child labor occurred. This also helps explain why agriculture still has some of the biggest problems with child labor, which we'll get back to in a bit. But it was the Industrial Revolution that dramatically changed how many kids worked and what that work looked like. There's a lot of factors for why it grew so much during this time period. For one, machines made work less complex, which meant children could be productive even with rudimentary skills. For another, there were just a lot more jobs that needed doing in cities now. But a big part of the story comes down to how children were thought about back then. They were seen more as economic assets and less as innocent kids who should be protected. Especially in New England, the Puritan work ethic was a dominant social and political ideal. Idleness was not only undesirable, but sinful. But the biggest predictor of child labor was poverty.
Child labor.
Oh, the biggest predictor of child labor was poverty. Wow. What a surprise, right? You think Ron DeSantis kids are going to be engaged in these weekend worker protections if they are to go through and get passed and get signed by him? You think the richest Floridians, their kids are going to be subject to these child labor protections that are being rolled back? If you think that they actually will, well, I got a diamond-encrusted bridge over an active volcano to sell you. Feel free to take a walk on the wild side. Let's continue.
It has never been a problem of the wealthy. Economic necessity often compelled poor families to send one or more of the children to the labor force, even amongst poor families that valued education.
So you have a complex brew of industrialization, economic growth, political and religious beliefs about kids, and widespread economic inequality that drives more and more kids to work. So much so that between 1890 and 1910, no less than 18% of all children ages 10 to 15 worked. So what did that work actually look like? For most kids, it was work on their family farm. For other children, it was home-based work, things like florists, seamstresses, things that help moms supplement the income of dad. In cities, it was often the street trades, newspaper boys, shoe shines, messengers, things like that. But all sorts of light manufacturing employed children. You saw this a lot in glass bottle manufacturing, but less so in sheet glass. The heavier the industrial process, the fewer kids you'd see working in it. But one of the biggest employers of children was the textile industry. In 1900, 25,000 of the nearly 100,000 textile workers in the South were children younger than 16. By 1904, that had increased to 50,000, with 20,000 of those children being under 12. It was the work of the glass bottle makers, coal miners, and textile workers that really changed the conversation around child labor, though. The conditions were often brutal, and the photos of children performing these jobs made the conditions impossible to ignore.
So as we can see, kids had to survive, their families had to survive, and so therefore they were easily more exploited, and they were put into a lot of more dangerous jobs in order to be able to get things produced. And as far as us today, well, as they say, when you know better, you do better. And so we know now through child psychology and things like that, where, of course, we don't put this amount of strenuous work on kids because it's not really healthy. And if you want a healthier society, well, then you make sure that kids, yes, you introduce work, but you have to do it to a degree in which is appropriate for them. We're the adults. We set what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. So having kids work in mines and in textile factories really isn't appropriate for a child, especially since the risks of harm are even greater. Let's continue.
So it's the mid-19-teens, and progressive groups like the National Child Labor Committee start agitating for national legislation to outlaw child labor. Congress enacted a bill in 1916 and then another in 1919 to crack down, but both were overturned at the Supreme Court. In the same time period, though, economic inequality was on the decline, which meant more and more parents could afford to send their kids to school. Then in the 1930s, the Great Depression basically ended industrial child labor because so many adults were out of work or would work for really low wages that employers didn't really need to hire kids. Then finally came the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which established minimum wages, maximum hours, and restrictions on child labor.
The irony is, by 1938, child labor in the mines, mills, and factories was history. The reform movement created enough sense of moral outrage that it was effectively abolished
Now, as you're seeing today, this didn't end child labor once and for all in this country. It just put limits on the type of work kids could do, aka no more factories or mines, how many hours kids could work, etc. But the FLSA didn't solve everything. Agriculture has always been our biggest problem when it comes to child labor, partly because farming wasn't included in the original bill. It wasn't even covered until 1974, but even then, the standards were way weaker than any other industry.
How old are you?
12,
12. How old are you?
9.
9.
Which is partly why today, as many as 500,000 children harvest 25% of the food we eat in this country.
Did you know that? $500,000 kids produce 25% of the food that we eat. Many of wow. Think about how little they get paid.
In 1938, it might have made sense to exclude agriculture from the FLSA because family farms needed their kids to work on them. Today, though, small family farms produce less than 3% of our food. On those industrial farms, 68% of all agricultural labor is performed by immigrants or their children, often in sweltering heat with consistent exposure to pesticides. But child labor has been on the rise across industries. The federal government reported a 69% increase in child labor violations in recent years. Making matters worse, the deteriorating economic conditions in Central America have driven a huge influx of unaccompanied minors into the U.S. More than
that destabilization that's happening in Central American countries is due to U.S. foreign policy. So we're making conditions so bad because of our foreign policy and destabilizing these nations that now you have unaccompanied minors, children, teenagers coming here to work in the United States. And where do they go? They go into the agriculture sector. And they're being exploited. So you have, not only are they undocumented many times, but they're also children. So do you think they're actually making enough? And who just made exceptions for agricultural workers who are undocumented in this country? Wasn't it not Donald Trump? Did he talk about he was going to mass deport all these people? But then he stopped and said, we're going to keep the agricultural workers because he's down for the exploitation. And to curb it, he won't stop the destabilization in these countries that they come from, because then the corporations need that destabilization to happen. So they're either going to suffer in their home country or they're going to suffer here. Either way, they're going to suffer. Either way, they're going to be exploited. Thought I was about to say the children. I guess it depends on what type of children, huh?
U.S. More than 260,000 kids have come here in the last 2 years, many of whom are looking for work or being forced to. In spite of all that, 14 states have made moves to loosen the restrictions on child labor, partly because many employers claim they're struggling to find people willing to work for them.
We used to have stacks of applications. Now we might have 2 or 3.
Now, numerous groups have come out against these proposed changes in state laws, which sets up a new chapter in a centuries-long fight.
And as far as we can't find workers, there are a ton of people who are actually trying to find work that are actually adults, but they're not hiring. Because a lot of these companies realize that they can run stuff on a skeleton crew and still make the same amount of money. And so since they run on a skeleton crew, then they're not hiring, but they have to make it look like to the government that, oh yeah, well, we're looking for somebody, when in reality they're not. So they will put out, they'll put out, I almost said help wanted ads, but they'll put out notices and say, hey, we're hiring, but they're not actually hiring. They just want you to make it look like they're hiring, when in reality, they're not only exploiting us adults, but they're exploiting kids as well. And they'd rather hire a kid because then it's easier to exploit them than to exploit the rest of us. Now you see, this is talk about the expanding of child labor. It's not just happening in Florida, it's happening in many states in this country. And your child could be one of those children that bears the brunt of this exploitation even more.
I thought it was a settled question. What's even more troubling on top of that is I'm not sure we're seeing sufficient moral outrage about the resurgence of child labor.
And yes, the moral outrage that we should have seems to be a lot less than you think it would. And so what does this mean? This is part of the capitalist system that we live in, where the more exploitable people that you have, the more money that can be made by the people at the top. The shareholders, the CEOs, they can make bigger dividend checks. And remember, one of the largest forms of theft in this country is actually wage theft. It outnumbers all different types of theft, many different types of theft combined. And so this is why it's so important to fight against these rollbacks of child labor protections. So monitor how much your kids are working, monitor what their employers are asking of them. Especially if they are on the younger side, like 14, 15. Make sure, be very strict. Now, if you don't have to have your kids working, then hey, leave them out of the workforce. Now, if you find it important for them to learn certain things, I agree, they need to learn some of these skills. But here's the funny part a lot of people don't think about. Why don't a lot of these schools, especially in more underserved areas, why don't we have wood shop class anymore? Why don't we have metal shop anymore? Why don't we have auto tech? Why don't we have any of these carpentry classes and things like that that actually would teach these kids in certain industries where it's in a very controlled setting where they're not exploited? It's because it gives the employers a way to exploit the kids. And then they say, oh, it's for education. Meanwhile, they're making boatloads of profit off of your kids. And they're making even more because they're kids. This is why we talk about organizing. This is why we talk about getting out there. This is why we talk about doing mutual aid. Because we have to change the system to save our children. Can be done. We just have to be at the forefront of it to stop it in its tracks. All right, go ahead and give a like to the stream. Thank you so very much to all of you. And so with that being said, we're going to go into the comments in the chat, and then we're going to go into doing a patron shout out, and we'll head on out. All right, so I'm going to check to see if we have any Rumble rants. Okay. All right, so it looks like we're good on the Rumble side. Let's go into the Rockfin chat. Looks like we're going on Rockfin. All right. So let's go into the YouTube chat. So we're going to start off with the super sticker. Thank you very much to James Starks for the super sticker. Wesley says, my job as a teen were always towards personal goals. Never did my parents expect money for a household. And that is, your experience. But for a lot of us who grew up working class, especially working poor, there was no other way for us to be able to survive. Especially when you turn 16, you had to get a job because the electric that had to be paid, right? So that's what happened with a lot of us. Let's continue on. Rootsy says, JB, you need a co-host for times like this. These hit a sister up. Thank you so very much. Jacqueline says, look, I hate to get into this, but I haven't peed in 14 years. So my bladder has to get used to filling up again. So that just comes with the territory of, getting a kidney transplant, but that's a whole other thing. Let me see. See here. Jacqueline says, we're going to go back to 5-year-olds working in the coal mines, aren't we? Like we were in Britain back in the bad old days. Certainly hope not, but it feels that way. You see. Traveler's Wolf says, CEOs' heads are too big to work in the mines. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Janice says harassment was terrible at 15. Had men as old as 60 to 70 years old not only harassing me, but stalking me and trying to get me to get in their cars when I left work to walk home after my shift. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, Janice. Wow. Kate Mack says one of my older grandsons on his first week working at a fast food place was asked by his manager to work a double, and the guy paid him with weed. I was beyond furious. What? Oh my gosh. By the way, that manager was fired. Good. Wow, that's crazy. Kate Mack said, when I was 12, I worked at Carnival Circus all summer long, and every cent went to my mom also. But I had to say I made a lot of money in all cash. Okay. Yeah. Lorshek says, U.S. have abolished child protection laws since years, but now the outcry is big because done under Trump. And the thing is, like when Biden was in office, I actually talked about this on my show about the child labor protections being rolled back. And it's being done under both. And we have to have just as much smoke for this type of exploitation under both parties, because both parties, honestly, it happens under both. Smokum says the lowest class in the entire United States of America is children. They are not citizens, and instead the U.S. courts treat them as property like slaves. Cristino says America doesn't want allies; they want slave states to exploit. Agreed. Roger says, JB, if wage theft is the bigger form of theft, then government handing over our wealth to the 1% is a close second. I agree with that. And thank you very much, Ms. Kate Mack. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much. Roger says, JB, Larry told me the reason why vocational trades went out the window is the educational system started to replace them with academia, tech, to the rest, but push to go to college, feed college industrial complex. Yeah, I mean, okay. Oh, Tim Price says, hey, James, your chapter is outside of this. I got to go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to head on out. Thank you guys so very much. Just to read this, we're in Super Chat, and I'll head on out. It says, evident we're malevolent. However, how can we ever prevent that so prevalent within our president and every one of his psychopathic precedents? Be well. Thank you so very much. So we're going to head on out. Thank you so very much to everybody. I'll be leaving just in a second because I got some visitors. But look, like I always say, water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. I will see you guys in the next one. Be sure to join me on Tuesday. I will have a guest. I just got to look at it, but I don't have time to do that. Anywho, thank you so very much for head kisses. And we'll give a shout out to patrons on our way out. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful day.